This is Michael Woodward, and this is Season 2, Episode 2 of the Jumblethink Podcast.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Jumblethink Podcast. We explore the ideas and dreams behind some of the leading entrepreneurs from around the world. Along the way, we will give you some tips and ideas of how you can chase your own big ideas and dreams and change the world around you. Our guest for today's episode is Matthew Schutte. Today's show is brought to you by FreshBooks.com. Get a free 30-day trial at www.gofreshbooks.com/jumblethink. That's www.gofreshbooks.com/jumblethink. Our guest on Thursday's episode is Bree Seeley. Here's a little taste of what's in store.
My name is Bree Seeley, and my business is me. And my role in the business is that I am the Chief Everything Officer. So my business was designed to help people bring their visions to life. So whatever that idea is, that little seed that's inside of you, waiting to be brought out into the world, I help people really harness that and create that as their reality. I really think that my big idea started when I was just a kid. I remember teaching, like playing school and putting all my stuffed animals, in the desks and standing up at the chalkboard and teaching. I would go to work with my mom. And when I was 4 and 5 years old, I was training her employees how to use the cash registers. And so I've kind of always been in this teacher, leader, mentor, coach role, but I didn't actively recognize that that's what I was doing until about 3 years ago.
Our episode with Bree is incredibly fun, and I think you're going to enjoy it, so make sure to come back this Thursday to check out more of our conversation with Bree Seeley. Now let's jump into today's episode with Matthew Schutte. Hey there, it's Michael Woodward. I'm the host of the Jumblethink Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning into today's episode. Our guest today is Matthew Schutte. He is a good friend of the Jumblethink Podcast and one of the episodes that was most listened to in Season 1. So before we jump into today's interview, let's hear a little bit more about Matthew Schutte.
I'm Matthew Schutte with Holo, and I'm the Director of Communications. Holo does two things. One, we're giving away to the world for free, and one is an ecosystem that we're nurturing. The first is we're building and supporting HoloChain. HoloChain is an infrastructure for creating and running fully peer-to-peer applications, apps that run on only the devices of the users themselves and that enable users to be in control of their own data, in control of how their applications work, and in control of how those applications connect to one another. Holo builds a bridge from that peer-to-peer applications world to the existing centralized internet. And it creates the incentives for enabling people to use their computer to help translate between that peer-to-peer web and the existing world of HTTP and HTML and web browsers, and to get compensated for doing so. So that's our focus, is bootstrapping a new communication pattern, and Holo and HoloChain are the two tools that we're launching to enable that to become real. For me, this all started a couple of decades ago, actually. I was really focused on how communities steer themselves. And about 10 years ago, I had a series of epiphanies in the middle of law school, where I realized that the way that communities had historically steered themselves was on the basis of discretion rather than violence. And the legal stuff that I was studying really didn't have anything to do with that. It was all about violence and maybe processes for that violence, but it wasn't about individuals being empowered. I realized that those systems had some significant advantages over our current ones, but they didn't scale well. And realized that the internet would enable us to scale discretion-based regulation in ways that had never before been possible. But what was required in order to pull that off was basically an entire redesign of the internet from the bottom up. As soon as I sort of realized how you might pull that off, I had a bit of an insight into what that might need to look like. It became my life's work. I literally stood up and walked into my roommate's room and said, I think I just realized what I'm going to be doing with the entire rest of my life. And she was like, what? Because she was studying for a test in law school. And I said, no, I really do. I feel like I've just figured out my life's work. And it was basically to work on infrastructures that improve the way that humans are able to communicate so that we're able to improve how we can coordinate. And at the end of the day, that feels like the most bang for buck that you can get is an improvement in how people are able to learn from one another, work together, etc. I'm not the only person who's seen this stuff as possible. Lots of other people have. I've managed to find a really good crew of humans to work alongside for the past few years with the Metacurrency Project, which is the group that's actually launching Holo out into the world. So purpose for me, there's no shortage there in this work. If anything, I have an issue on the other side. I find this work to be so meaningful. And in a time where the world is so in need of solutions for helping us to steer better in ways that work better for individuals and for communities, that the real challenge that I've had is in being able to not get overwhelmed by the significance of what we're trying to accomplish. It's so big that it's easy to get pulled in such a way that everything else in your life ceases to seem to matter. And I've had over the years periods where I don't really want to do anything except work on this. And as wonderful as this project might be, nothing is really the only thing that you should be doing. And so I'm actually having to really make an effort to take time for things outside of this: food, family, friends, fun. I just got out of the water surfing at Mavericks. Failed. I tried to catch a wave that was probably 40 feet on the face, and I had one of my most spectacular wipeouts ever. So it was an interesting moment in its own right. But those kinds of experiences are important too. And because the stuff that we work on feels so world-changing and counter to how a lot of the other things that are happening in technology seem to be moving, most things in the technology world look like they are steering us towards a world that is more top-down, some AI that governs from above, or more concentrating of wealth, a handful of companies basically steering how the bulk of humanity perceives the world. Like what we believe and see is really being sculpted by a handful of organizations at the moment. That's scary. And so to be working on something that runs directly counter to that and tries to push power towards individuals and enable them to really steer their own lives is there's no shortage of purpose or meaning in that for me at the moment. The reason that Holo matters, we are basically trying to make it so that individuals can come together and communicate and coordinate in ways that don't accidentally concentrate power. That it becomes a bottleneck that gets in the way of that community's ability to learn. When we created Holochain, that was our attempt to make it so that humans can come together in ways that enable them to coordinate without necessarily creating a power structure in the middle. Holo makes it so that when people use these Holochain applications, they aren't just talking to the people in their own world, the early adopters that have signed on. Holo makes it so that anyone can start using these new empowering applications through just a web browser, any web browser. And it creates the incentive structures that make it so that others will build the bridges to that distributed future. That the bridges that they build are basically by having their computer do a little bit of work to translate back and forth between the peer-to-peer web of the Holochain world and the centralized web of today's HTML and HTTP systems. I would say the main challenge for us to overcome is making really complicated ideas simple for communication purposes. We've gone so far out in our exploration that we've got our own little jargon, but if somebody else hasn't already walked through that journey, it can be difficult to show why something might be so profound or so useful, because they haven't seen the stepping stones along the way that would make that clear. And so the main thing that we struggle with is communicating why all of this stuff matters and why that ends up being so different from how we normally think about architectures today, the systems today. Most organizations, when they're trying to solve a problem, they get fixated on efficiency and they focus almost exclusively on that. And at the end of the day, when you look out at nature, nature does care about efficiency, but it cares a lot more about persistence. It cares more about resilience, about whether or not something's going to go extinct. Because we've architected all of our stuff on that basis, really focusing on how to strike a balance between efficiency and resilience, what we're working on can feel foreign to people initially. And so crafting the stories that make this visible in ways that people find not only understandable but compelling, that's probably been the biggest challenge for us that we're still working to overcome. Right now we are running a crowdfunding campaign, and that's been very successful. We've raised twice as much money in that already as we were hoping to raise over the entire period, and we're about halfway through. We're also about to embark on an initial community offering where we invite people to begin purchasing the currency that's going to be used in our peer-to-peer applications hosting ecosystem that we're building with Holo. That is going to be a big step for us. We're about to go through a big transition because we're looking to raise $2.5 million. We were an all-volunteer project, and so we're transitioning into something that is going to be a business. But that's the big next step for us. So that's the having a successful ICO over the next 30 days is going to be the thing that we really are focused on.
In a moment, we'll be back with segment 2, where we dive deep into the world of cryptocurrency, blockchain, the evolution of the internet, and so much more with Matthew Schutte. But first, we want to make sure you know where you can connect with us. You can find us on all of your favorite places to listen to podcasts, like Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher Radio, Google Play, and SoundCloud. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. As always, swing on over to jumblethink.com/podcast. That's jumblethink.com/podcast to find links to many of the best places to connect. Don't forget to find us on your favorite places to listen to podcasts and click that subscribe or follow button so you never miss another episode of the Jumblethink podcast. Now let's jump into the interview portion of our conversation with Matthew Schutte. Matthew, it is great to have you back on the Jumblethink podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great. Our team is going well. I got a surf in this morning. I think I mentioned already, I caught a giant wave that I did not make, but it was exciting nonetheless. I'm looking forward to seeing the footage. It may actually be the most spectacular wipeout of my entire surfing career. So we'll see how it looked from other people's. And I'm excited because I'm about to go on a tour of Europe.
Wow.
I'm flying tomorrow to go speak in Davos, attend some conferences in Zurich, and host meetups all over the continent, really focused on growing our community.
Yeah.
So we're going to be reaching out to developers and social activists and people that are interested in new forms of currency. And I'm going to get to do basically a high school graduation trip, but at 3 times the speed with none of the friends and in the middle of winter. So,
oh, that is so cool. I remember vividly from our last conversation your passion for surfing. So it's great to hear that you're getting out there and not stuck behind a computer, not stuck in meetings, not stuck in presentations, but you're getting some time to do something fun.
A little bit. Yeah. As I had mentioned earlier, I don't always strike that balance, but I'm trying to do a good job of striking it at the moment.
A lot's changed since we last talked. I mean, let's just start with the entire space, cryptocurrency. It went from undercurrent to everyone and their mother knew about Bitcoin and was chopping at the bit to get into Bitcoin. In your space, you've had an evolution of your project from just metacurrency project into launching some cool stuff. We're going to get into all of that. first off, I've got to ask, in this space right now, in this crypto world, which you are a part of, but different, what is all this chaos going on?
Gambling.
Okay.
I really think that's it. I mean, I think that everybody has a friend whose neighbor's kid was playing with their computer and can now buy a Lamborghini.
Okay.
And they're going, well, shoot, I if this is the future, then I don't want to miss out.
Right.
And that is not an awesome pattern.
Yeah.
Just to make it very visible. I think that this is, we've seen these things before.
Yeah.
Right. They call it the tulip crisis, the financial crisis of 2008. Like there's all sorts of
the internet bubble of the 90s.
Yeah, that's right. These bubbles happen over and over and over again. And the one thing that makes blockchain a little different from cloud computing and even things like artificial intelligence or these other new technologies that people got excited about was that there was no way for the general public to actually speculate.
Yeah.
And so the fact that anybody can go and get an account and say, well, all right, I want to try trading some currencies and see what happens, has made it so that the entire world can gamble on which of our new technological futures will win. And most of the people are not even trying to gamble on that. They're just going, well, is it going to go up tomorrow? Are other people going to think it's going to win? And the problem, in my opinion, there is we're seeing waiters and waitresses and people who are cleaning houses and taxi drivers invest significant sums of money relative to their total net worth. And I think that might all get wiped out.
Yeah.
I think that most of the cryptocurrencies that are on the market today aren't actually going to solve any real problems.
Yeah.
They are going to fairly quickly be supplanted by other architectures, hopefully ours, but others as well, that actually do solve real problems. And as soon as the other people think it's going to be real starts to evaporate, as soon as there's viable competition in the landscape, the market caps for those currencies are going to go through the floor and nobody's going to make out. So there are large organizations, large investors that have made a ton of dough already. I'm worried that it's the little folks that are going to get left holding the bag.
Yeah. And that's not to say there aren't things of value going on in blockchain. It's just you really have to know what you're doing if you want to play in that space and understand what the technology is, understand how the coin and tokens work, and then what these people are actually solving when it comes to problems in these specific spaces.
That's right. And almost none of the investor community has that literacy.
Yeah.
Right. And even for those who do, if something has legitimacy, it gets driven up even more so.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's very much a situation of the tail wagging the dog. And part of this has to do with the architecture of today's cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
Almost all of them are designed to be speculative tokens.
Yeah.
That's what they're engineered to do. There's a limited number of them. There's a variety of mechanisms that got used that actually make the problem far worse than it could be.
Okay.
They make it so that volatility is really high.
Yeah. That
little moves drive a price to a huge extent, just shift it 1,000% or something.
Yeah.
And that just makes it really easy for this space to whiplash around and become a market for gambling. That said, there are other patterns that you can use, and we're trying to incorporate those in ours. Now, I don't want to pretend like, oh, we're not going to have speculation in our system. There's no way to prevent people from gambling on your stuff. There's no way to prevent speculation.
Right.
But we've done a number of things to try to limit the influence of speculation on our system, Holo, because we don't want the tail to wag the dog.
Yeah.
Right. And so we've got our currency is redeemable. It's actually backed by hosting capacity.
Okay.
At the bare minimum, our hosting capacity. When people buy currency from us, we're saying, hey, if you can redeem this Holo fuel 1 credit for this much computing power, right? We will host an application for you. Now we're selling that at a rate where we think the members of our community are actually going to be able to offer a far better price.
Yeah.
Right. They'll get twice as much computing or 10 times as much computing as we would offer you. But it is a backed currency. We're creating the floor, right?
Yeah.
You're going to get at least this much. So it's a pre-purchase of computing power.
I think this might be a good time to pivot for a second.
Sure.
Let's talk about what's going on inside of Holo. We've kind of hit a little bit about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies as a whole. We'll probably circle back and have some conversations because there are some terminology, some things that are consistent between what you guys are doing and what is happening in the world of blockchain. And I think there's conversations that will apply to what you guys are doing that apply to the larger crypto space. So there's going to be some overlap there, but I think it's really good for us to step back and specifically get a foundation of what you guys are doing. So you guys started out as Meta Currency Project and started creating different outlets there of different things you're working on. One of those was Holo and the Holo project. You got some cool things going on with Holo. Tell us about the Holo project, the Indigogo campaign, and what you guys are kicking off right now.
Yeah. One of the things that is unusual about us is that we actually did do a hardware launch.
Yeah, which is really cool.
Yeah. And basically what we did was, we created this application infrastructure called Holochain. And that's live in the world now. Okay. It's in an alpha release. It's an early release, but people are already building applications on top of that.
Let's stop right there for a second. Holochain sounds a lot like blockchain, but is vastly different. What are the similarities? What are the differences? And how does Holochain work for a developer and for the end consumer?
Sure. So Holochain is one way to think about it is a distributed data integrity engine. That probably makes people's eyes glaze over. But what it means is, hey, you're going to be able to trust this data even though you're not necessarily trusting any individual that's running this data. And that's similar to the problem that blockchain is trying to solve. It's actually not quite identical, but it's similar.
Yeah.
Blockchain would frame themselves in the same way, but we have some slight architectural differences.
Yeah.
The main difference between Holochain and blockchain is that we were trying to solve how do you run distributed applications, like really even complicated stuff like Facebook.
By distributed, you mean peer-to-peer instead of central hub or cloud-based system. It's much more distributed across the community so that in a lot of ways, Facebook owns Facebook. With a distributed community, with a distributed network, the individuals really own that software in a lot of ways because they have control over their engagement and how it works and what they let out there at a much different level than what Facebook would allow you through a cloud computing-based framework.
That's right. And if I were to be picky about it, I would say that blockchain is actually a decentralized application, not a distributed one.
Okay.
And there's, people can argue about that, but if nothing else, blockchain's approach to this problem is, hey, we don't have to trust anybody to hold onto the records.
Right.
If we can have everybody hold on to every record.
Yeah.
That's kind of their thing. And
which doesn't sound sustainable.
It turns out it's not. Having every person have to hold on to a copy of everything that every other person has ever done is obviously unsustainable.
Yeah.
It's incredibly expensive. And one of the things that it does actually very quickly, counter to the ambitions of many in the blockchain community, it concentrates power.
Yeah.
It actually concentrates power with the limited number of people who have the resources to be able to operate full nodes, to be able to participate as essentially full participants in the system, where they are holding on to those copies of everything that everybody else has ever done. And they're able to solve this, cryptographic puzzle, which is basically a lottery. They're able to play the lottery at a rate that is profitable.
Yeah.
Unless you have specialized equipment and maybe a deal with some government official who has access to cheap hydropower in China, you ain't playing that game.
Right.
It costs you more in the electricity than it takes for them to actually do this stuff. And so it doesn't work out for the rest of us. And it creates this immediate division between those who make the rules and enforce them, the miners, and everybody else.
Right.
Anyone else who's using the system. That's not a system for distributing power. Holochain's a little different. With Holochain, we are taking some of the same pieces of architecture that people use in the blockchain world, specifically hash chains. But what that means is a way of making it so that, hey, if somebody changes data, it becomes obvious to others that they've changed something.
Okay.
It enables us to have a tamper-resistant log.
Yeah.
It makes it visible, is basically the deal. We took that and we combined it with some of the pieces that people are familiar with through BitTorrent.
Yeah.
BitTorrent and other peer-to-peer file sharing systems use something called a distributed hash table, which is basically a way of going, hey, we're going to take this thing that you're adding and we're going to share it we're going to have 10 people, let's say, hold on to it in this network.
Okay.
We might have 1 million computers, right? We're going to have 10 folks hold on to it. And when somebody else goes to look for it, they're going to know exactly where to look.
Okay.
And if one of those 10 people goes offline, and all of a sudden we've only got 9 copies, the other 9 copies are going to go, oh, we need to make a backup.
Right.
And they're going to recruit another person to make that backup. And it's just a system that enables us to come to agreement about who's going to hold on to those things so that we know where to put them and where to look them up. Yeah. And we do that based on the content itself.
Yeah.
So the content itself dictates where it's going to go in the network. And so when somebody else asks for that piece of content, the network knows where it is because the content itself holds it within it. I don't need to go into too much more detail than that, but that difference of, oh, we'll have 10 people hold on to this instead of, oh, we'll have 1 million hold on to this is a drastic difference. And it actually gets more efficient with scale.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
The bigger your community gets, the more efficient this mechanism of holding on to information gets. And so we're a little different in that regard. The one other big difference, and this is less in the weeds technical and a little more in the weeds philosophical, is that blockchains actually lose the bulk of the information in their system.
Oh, wow.
Blockchains, Bitcoin, for example, every 10 minutes, one Bitcoin miner wins the lottery, and everybody else goes, all right, that guy's version of the last 10 minutes is going to become the truth for the entire community.
Wow.
Right? So his perspective on what the ordering of the transactions were and which transactions got in and all that kind of stuff, his perspective is what becomes the truth for the entire network.
Okay.
10 minutes later, there's another random guy who wins the lottery, right? And it's his perspective. But what happens at each of those moments is that we throw out everyone else's perspective.
Okay.
Right? The difference with Holochain is we actually keep everyone's unique perspective.
Okay.
And so we're able to see the world through each of their lenses. Now they're signing things cryptographically, so we know, yep, this guy said that this is what he saw. But the difference there is actually kind of profound. And I'll use a little example. If you close one eye and you look out at the world, you can see the world.
Yeah.
And if you close the other eye and you look out the world, you can see the world.
Yeah.
Those are just two different images. Each is a single perspective.
Right.
But if you have both of your eyes open, you get something richer.
Yeah.
Depth. The fact that you're able to cross multiple perspectives gives you the ability to perceive of the difference between those perspectives.
Yeah.
And the difference gives you additional information. When you cross more perspectives, you get even richer information.
Yeah.
So the holochain world, because we're making use of this holographic principle of having each party see the world from their own perspective, and because we're using a more efficient architecture for holding on to it, we don't have to throw away all the information except for one guy's thing. We're actually able to hold on to more of that, and that lets us do richer stuff.
That's very cool. And you mentioned that there's the Holo chain, which I think is pretty awesome. Real quickly, you mentioned that it's already in the wild. People can start using Holo chain. Now, some of the hardware aspect of the Indigogo campaign, which we'll talk about in a minute, isn't out in the wild completely yet. But what are some of the things that are already being explored with Holo chain? What are people doing with it? And what are the things that you're excited about that they're doing?
Yeah, I'll just give 3 quick examples. So one of the pieces is it was originally set up as just a sample application at a hackathon we did last March.
Okay.
And it's still super simple, and we're going to upgrade it more in the next couple of weeks. There's some community members starting to build on it. It's a peer-to-peer alternative to Twitter. It's Twitter, but without the company in the middle.
Okay.
And so what that means is Twitter works the way that you want it to work.
Right.
Right. We call it clutter.
Okay.
Because that's what we think Twitter actually is, right? All the social media stuff.
A lot of noise.
And because a clutter is a flock of cats.
Oh,
right?
I didn't know
A clutter is a clutter of cats. And so clutter is interesting. I think that'll be a fun one because it's easy and people will be able to see very quickly like, oh, wow, okay, this works.
Okay.
The other two, there's someone who came to our Barcelona hackathon a month or so ago in Spain, and he built a fractal version of Wikipedia.
Oh, that's cool.
So a perspective-oriented version of Wikipedia. So you can see, well, what is this topic from the perspective of this group?
Yeah.
Or what is it from this other group? And so you can explore through different paths.
So it takes into like people's biases and worldview and not just data.
Yeah, it does. The original version of Wikipedia is a one-size-fits-all, right? So you only are able to see something that's really, controversial, like abortion. Whereas in a fractal Wikipedia, you could have each of those groups sort of having their own perspective, and you could cross those if you want.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. There's actually a hackathon happening around that later this month. It's going to be a week-long hackathon, both in person in London, but also online.
Oh, cool.
So developers anywhere can jump onto that and participate in helping to make that system more robust. The last one is forms of value accounting. So lots of organizations, especially socially minded organizations and benefit corporations, but even for-profit corporations, they want to pay attention to more than just the bottom line.
Yeah.
They want to be able to steer themselves on the basis of more than just dollars in a spreadsheet. But it's hard to do that. And we've got various folks working on value accounting applications that enable a community to make visible forms of activity that they want to support.
Okay.
So that they can nurture those.
All right.
Right? If the whole point for us around currencies, for people who listened to our last podcast, currencies are about basically symbol systems that make flows of activity visible.
Yeah.
And because they do that, they help a community to steer. And so the value accounting stuff is really interesting both in terms of social impact investing, but also in terms of how a community actually steers itself, whether that community is a group of artists or a corporation.
That's really cool. You mentioned you're doing some hackathons. I work in the development space from the web development aspect. What is the onboarding process? Probably not the right way to say it, but we'll say it anyway that way. What is the process for a developer who's like going, this sounds killer awesome. I have some cool ideas. I love what web allows me to do, but I really love the concept of decentralized or a community-driven application where there's a lot more ownership. How can they make the transition or step into the space and start building? What's the code frameworks? What does that look like at a very simple level?
Unlike a lot of these blockchain projects, we're trying to make it easy for people to build on our system. I know that's a shocker.
Novel idea for sure.
Novel idea. But if you want people actually using your stuff, it helps to make it easy to use your stuff. So Holo Chain itself is built in Go. Go is a language that is kind of in the history. It came out of Google, but it's really good at parallel processing. And it's kind of a modern version of C. But the long story short is most people don't need to worry about Go.
Okay.
Unless you're wanting to work on Holochain Core,
Okay.
you ain't need know nothing about this, right? Because we've got application engines that ride on top of that underlying Go framework. And so our application engines, right now we just have two of them, one for Lisp and another for JavaScript. Those make it so that you can do all of your application development in, let's say, JavaScript.
Right.
We expect that we're going to see people building application engines for Python and Ruby and all kinds of other stuff as time goes on.
Yeah.
But the main one that we're going to be supported for the near-term future is JavaScript because it's the language of the web. There's lots of great libraries for it. We're actually about to do a little bit of a refactor on the Holochain code so that we can support something called V8 and make the JavaScript development. Our goal is to make building on top of Holochain as easy as Ruby on Rails.
Yeah.
For developers out there who are familiar, there's a programming language and set of tools that people went, oh my gosh, this is so easy. I don't have to bash my head against the wall like I normally do. And that's what we're trying to get to.
Yeah.
We've also built a bunch of tools that make it easier for people to step into building a distributed application, because it turns out that building a distributed application is very different from building a centralized application.
Right.
And just to point out, the blockchain apps, though they run on a decentralized or distributed network, they are centralized applications.
Yeah.
Everything happens from the perspective of the network as a whole.
Right.
As defined by the lottery process that we talked about a minute ago. That's very different from when we're actually taking into account the perspective of each of the users. Oh, I saw the world this way. Oh, I saw the world a little differently. And they actually did, right? Because they were in different places at different times, and they have different sensors. And so we've created some tools where it's kind of a WYSIWYG. It's a fill in the blank, you answer some questions and it writes the code for you to at least get your initial templating set up.
All right.
But I'd say the biggest barrier to entry is not a technical one. It's this mental one of shifting your framing from I'm solving as engineer from the top looking down on the system to, oh no, I have to think about this from each of these different perspectives.
Yeah. It would allow developers to develop applications that are much richer at that level.
That's right. It actually enables applications that operate as part of larger ecosystems far more effectively, because each individual is able to take one app and then bridge between that and another app. And it's kind of like how APIs work, but but where all the power is in the hands of the individual. Anything they can read out of one application, they can write into another. Right. And so that's pretty powerful. The other piece I would say is that makes it easy is we're trying to put a lot of effort into building a supportive and playful and fun community, basically, right?
Yeah.
And so we've got an online chat community that has 700 plus members already. That's at chat.holochain.net. That community is awesome. There's all kinds of people sharing ideas for applications. So not everybody's a developer, right? Some people have ideas, but they don't know how to build them.
Yeah.
There's people talking about things like that there. There's people actually talking about the development. There's people coordinating on building applications.
Okay.
So there's channels and all that kind of stuff, and specific apps. There's a channel for the Clutter app, so people who want to contribute to building the peer-to-peer Twitter. And there's a channel for some value accounting stuff. So it's fun. That's the case. And then, as I mentioned before, I'm going to Europe.
Yeah.
And we're about to do a whole bunch of meetups and hackathons and things all over Europe over the next month or two, really focused on getting people introduced to what we're up to, but more importantly, connected with one another.
Yeah.
We really want to help seed some local communities so that if you come to this thing, you find 2 or 3 friends that are interested in the things that you're interested in, and you can collaborate together as you learn this and dive in and try to create the things that are exciting to you.
Yeah, which is really cool, because from a developer standpoint, I remember when Ruby on Rails was like the hot ticket just came out. But it's really cool that from day one, you understand that the foundation for success is built on community and what the community builds. And you have to have that mentality if you're going to be decentralized, because it requires everyone to be a part for the success of the Holo chain.
That's right. Yeah. I used to do innovation consulting and organizational structure consulting with Fortune 500s, but also startups. And the biggest tool in the toolkit is play.
Yeah.
Right. At the end of the day, it's really important to make it so that it's easy for people to be vulnerable with one another.
Yeah.
Because if you want people to be able to do new stuff and learn, you need them to be able to take risks. And the truth is, the biggest risk in any organization is not financial risk, it's social risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's, am I going to look like a dummy if I fail?
Status.
And
what is my status?
Right.
Am I accepted? Do I belong, or do I feel like I'm outcast?
Exactly. And so you have to make it so that people can be vulnerable, so that they can fail, and that doesn't end up costing them too much. And one of the key ways that you can do that is by making it playful.
Yeah. Having fun along the way, making an experiment.
That's it. That's exactly it.
We had a great guest on in season 1 months and months ago now. And I loved what he said. He said, innovation happens at the edges. And it's really cool that you're building the space where people can experiment at the edges, where people have that space in Holochain. I think that's pretty cool.
In fact, it's not just like, oh, this is part of our community growth strategy. That's core to the Holochain architecture, that insight. Right. The reason that Holochain is built the way it is because we think that in order to enable a community to try new stuff, they need to be able to have individuals try new things without having to get permission from the top. And just like a honeybee that goes off and explores for pollen far away, if it finds something good, it can come back and do a dance, and other bees come and, oh, wow, there's lots of good stuff over here. The entire hive might get fed from that risk that first bee took. But if you had to actually have the entire hive go over there together in order to do that exploration, and you didn't find anything, extinction, right? And so this pattern of enabling us to move in slightly different directions and yet still coordinate we think of it as the key to adaptive capacity, because it enables a community to get the most amount of learning for the least amount of risk. So for us, it's not just a theory thing. It's at the core of what we're trying to build in the world and make possible.
There are developers listening, and I know that there are because I have friends that are developers that listen to this podcast, and they may be going, hey, I am interested in learning how to be a part of this community as a developer. Where can they start that journey?
I would go to our Mattermost. Chat.holochain.net is probably the best place for meeting other people. We also have a developer training site, developer.holochain.org.
Okay.
I think .net or .org might work for both of those. But we're actually having a debate right now. We may be transitioning everything to .org shortly. But developer.holochain.org and chat.holochain.net. Those are the spots for getting started. And then our GitHub repository is at github.metacurrency/holochain, actually. So those are probably the initial places to dip a toe in the water.
There is so much more about Holo that we wanted to cover. So we created an additional episode. It's a bonus episode that is live right now. It goes live the same time as this episode. Make sure you swing on over there and check that out. We talk about Indigogo, how that campaign's working out. We talk about, if you're a non-tech person, how you can become part of the Holo community and get involved and make an impact. We also talk about a lot of other cool topics around the world of blockchain and all of that. So make sure you check out the bonus episode. Before we jump into the rapid fire questions, Matthew, can you let us know how people can get involved with Holochain, how they can find out more, and even check out that Indigogo campaign?
Yeah, you can go to holochain.org or holo.host. That's HOLO.HOST. Both of those will get you started. Holo.host is our website for Holo. If you are outside the US, China, and South Korea, you can learn about the ICO there. You can also learn about the Indiegogo campaign there. Both of those are running through the middle of February. The ICO is going to launch on January 23rd.
We'll be right back with our rapid fire questions with Matthew Schutte of the Holo Project. For you, the listener of the Jumblethink podcast, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day free trial to give you the opportunity to try out their services. FreshBooks is the easy-to-use invoicing software designed to help freelancers, small business owners, and entrepreneurs to get organized, save time, invoicing, and get paid faster. FreshBooks is built to support the needs of growing businesses, just like yours. On average, customers double their revenue in 24 months. FreshBooks can also help you spend less time on the boring tasks like paperwork, invoicing, and reconciling your expenses, and freeing you up so you can spend your time on the parts of the business you love. To learn more about FreshBooks or to start your free 30-day trial, just go to www.gofreshbooks.com/jumblethink. That's www.gofreshbooks.com/jumblethink. We're back with Matthew Schutte for rapid fire questions. You ready for some quick fire action here?
Absolutely.
Well, our first question is, what is one tip you would give someone with a big idea or dream and they don't know where to start?
I would say find others who share any portion of your vision. Go on Google, go on Reddit, go on chat.holochain.net, right? And share it. I think the biggest mistake people can make is going, man, this thing is really big and I don't want to risk it being stolen.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest mistake people can make. It paralyzes them. And if the idea is really that great, you should do it because you're wanting to do it.
Yeah.
Right? You should do it because it's the activity that you want to engage in. And so go get started. For me, the little quick story is I wanted to work on this stuff for 5 years before I got up the guts to start a meetup group called Build the Collaborative Internet.
Okay.
And as soon as I did, people came out of the woodwork.
Wow.
Everybody was looking for this kind of community.
Wow.
And so take that first step, even though you don't know what's going to come of it. Go take that first step and allies will emerge.
What is one change you'd like to see in the world?
Well, it's what I'm working on.
Okay.
But the thing that I'd like to see in the world is us start to be able to collaborate in ways that don't end up stripping individuals of their own agency.
Okay.
I want us to see organizations that are actually organic.
Okay.
Because I think that not only leads to a more human world, I think it's our only shot at successfully navigating the really complex challenges that we are facing.
Yeah. What do you want your legacy to be?
I think you asked me this question last time.
Yeah. There's a couple that are the same on the rapid fires, but yeah.
I still am not all that worried about legacy.
Okay.
I'll revise that. If legacy is people knowing about me, I don't really care.
Right.
But if legacy is there was footprints in the snow, you don't know who left them, but they're there, and the world is shaped a little differently.
Yeah.
I want these new ways of working together to be some of the footprints that I helped put into the world.
Yeah.
And if you're doing something that really does change the world, at some point, people forget who did that.
Yeah.
Right? So if this really becomes widely adopted, it'll just become the water that we swim in.
Yeah.
We won't even notice it anymore. And so I've got to be okay with not having recognition be a part of that. It just has to be about that reality, being real in the world, that being present. And so that's what I'm hoping to do.
Where do you find inspiration?
I find inspiration in all sorts of places, but usually play.
Okay.
I'd say for the most part, I'm a surfer.
Yeah.
And I play in nature. And so maybe that's probably the actual answer there is nature. But and so much of what we do is really focused on biomimicry, of studying nature's patterns and then trying to pull out what the insights are.
Yeah.
But it's not just this like scientific, I will study the natural world and extract its insights. It's far more of a dance and a curiosity of getting to go, what's going on there? Yeah. And why? Like, in general, my assumption is if something exists in the world, and especially the natural world, it's there because it works.
Yeah.
Right? Nothing is there that is a failure.
Yeah.
This thing has managed to get through, billions of years of history, and somehow it's in this form now.
Yeah.
And even if it wasn't like that 200 million years ago, at some point it got into this form and it managed to survive. And it's probably got a whole bunch of mechanisms for sensing and interpreting and making decisions about and taking action in the world. Even if it's bacteria or a plant, there's a wisdom there.
Yeah.
And so it's just a fun game for me to see a part of the world, whether it's a tree leaf or the way that a wave is breaking or the shape of a rocky shore, to go, why is that like that? How did that get like that? Yeah. And what's enabling it to persist?
Yeah.
And are there lessons there? So for me, I'd say that's the That's it. But that research isn't. Yeah, again, it's a joy focused search, rather than a damn it, I need this answer kind of focused search.
Yeah. What is one book you think every dreamer or entrepreneur should read, and why?
Every dreamer or entrepreneur should read. Well, this will come back to the previous example a little bit. And so this is not your normal like business book. There's a guy named Paul Kraffel, who wrote a book called Seeing Nature. And it is wonderful. It's just his stories of change and flows in the natural world that he's witnessed and the wisdom that he's gotten from that.
Yeah.
And I had a period where I basically stepped away from work and pretty much lived out of my car for about 6 months, a couple of years ago, in order to work on studying nature more closely and figuring out what are the patterns that work in nature. And at the end of that, I had a bunch of epiphanies, and then I picked up this book and read it, and it was like most of the stuff that I had figured out he had there in that book, and they weren't academic, right? They were stories. So you got it, and it was just a joy to read. So Kraffel is a wonderful individual, and his book Seeing Nature is awesome.
What is one tool that is significant for the success of your business?
So this isn't going to be like a hardware software tool. It's going to be a process, a practice. We make use of gratitudes at the beginnings of our meetings, meaning like, hey, what are you grateful for?
Yeah.
And it's a short period of time, but it changes how people show up in the meeting, and it makes it a much more human experience. It enables us to be vulnerable with one another because of the ways in which we're communing on a human level. Then going, all right, the agenda items are, bullet point 1. And we do that stuff too, but we take time for the human. And so starting with a little bit of gratitude and sometimes check-ins, where are you at right now? Can be profound.
What is one habit you find helpful in your life as an entrepreneur?
So this is one that's been hard to learn. And I'm still working on learning it. But asking for help.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And being able to accept it.
Yeah.
So asking for help is one thing, and it takes knowing what you need to even be able to ask. But being able to accept it is another one. And it's not just, emotionally I'm able to accept it. It actually requires a fair bit of work on your part.
Right.
To make yourself available to that other person so that they can get what they need from you on an ongoing basis to be successful themselves. And I am such a creative, and I'm so, I get lost in the exploration, and I enjoy that. And I give myself a fair bit of freedom and play in order to do that work. That it's a little, my habits don't always support that whole accepting the help.
Right.
Side. And so that's actually my New Year's resolution is, and it's not been the first time. So I've gotten better over the years, but I'm really, because it looks like we are going to be asked to play at such a bigger scale in this next phase. And I really do want to be able to do that and not get destroyed in the process. That I'm working on asking for help and being able to accept it.
How do you start and finish your day?
I wish I had a great, I meditate, kind of answer to this. That's not the case. Often I'm working pretty late. And I will work almost until I'm ready to pass out, and then I'll, do some cleaning, brush my teeth, go to bed. When I wake up, I usually wake up with ideas. So I often, my sort of half awake, half asleep mental state is probably my most creative. And so I will often go to bed thinking about something, and I'll wake up with the answer.
Wow.
But then it's a frantic dash to get that answer down before I forget it.
Right.
So I will often wake up, turn on my phone, go to Dragon Dictate, and try to just dictate what I'm thinking into the phone. And then I'll, if I'm jump on a call, make some food or go for a surf. I usually get my playtime and kind of meditative stuff in the middle of the day.
Okay.
And at the moment, because I live in San Francisco at the beach, I wait until the waves get good and then I go surf.
Yeah.
So that's I'm going to be basically living on a train for the next month or two. So I'm actually hoping to make a practice of some meditation, maybe even some yoga. Because though that's been an ambition for a long time, it's not yet really a part of my life. So I'm like, all right, well, if I'm going to be away from the ocean for a while, maybe I can work on that.
Yeah. If you weren't doing what you are doing today, what would you be doing?
I'd probably be surfing.
Okay.
To be honest. Yeah. If I wasn't working on this stuff in some form, if it wasn't Holo and Holo Chain, I'm sure I'd be doing something else. But if I take all of I'm trying to change how communities steer themselves. If I took that off the table, yeah, I'd probably be surfing. It's incredibly fun and beautiful and enriching in a variety of ways. So I've definitely sacrificed a lot over the years in terms of not getting to do as much of that as I would like.
Yeah.
In terms of going to different places, I would really like to go and explore some other parts of the world and surf. But I'd probably be doing a bit more of that. The other thing that I'd like to do a lot more of is music. I'd like to be playing music. It's a similar sort of joyous exploration, and I get to do a little bit of that. But I'd love to do that a lot more, especially with other folks. I'd love to be jamming and all that. But at this moment, it's all back burner for the work stuff.
What is one dream you're still wanting to fulfill in your own life?
I don't actually know.
Okay.
I want this to be real in the world. I mean, this is, I mentioned earlier that, the thing that I struggle with is whether I have too much passion around this, right? So the dream is that we get to a place where we're living in a world where each of us is really able to steer our own lives. And as a result, we as communities are able to steer far more effectively.
Yeah.
And the grand ambition there is not just, hey, it'll be better for humans. It's, hey, it'll be better for the whole planet. I feel like if we don't upgrade our ability to do sense making and coordination, then we're going to crash the planet.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to kill enough key species off that we're not able to make food, or something. And I don't want to see that happen. Yeah. I feel like the biodiversity of our planet is the wealth.
Yeah.
Right? It is the richest wealth. It took a really long time for us to get there. It took a really long time for these different intricate systems to kind of get to a point where they were stable and working and functioning in a way that could support us. And so my dream is that we actually get the communication systems and tools and processes to a level where people are able to actually make decisions in their own life that don't shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
Right. At a small scale and at a big scale.
Yeah.
And so that's the grand ambition.
Before we close out today's episode, what's one last thought you would like to leave us with?
I guess I would actually have it be a question.
Okay.
So for those folks who are listening, I'd like to ask, what is the future that you want? What is the way in which you want people to relate to one another, to be able to contribute, to be able to have those contributions recognized? And whether you share it in a comment on this or you go to Holo Chain and share it with us, I'd love to just kind of see what other people are feeling inspired by.
Matthew, it's always fun to have you on the podcast. Thanks for coming back and being our first guest for season 2 of the Jumble Think podcast. And I'm really excited about all you're creating and all you're doing with Holo and the larger picture of how you guys are changing the world.
Michael, thank you so much for having me. It's always great.
Once again, I want to thank today's guest, Matthew Schutte, for taking time out to share his story and give us insight into how Holo, Holo Chain, and the Metacurrency Project are impacting the world. On Thursday, our guest is Bree Seeley. Super fun episode. Make sure you swing back and check that out. Today's show is brought to you by FreshBooks.com. Get a free 30-day trial at www.freshbooks.com. gofreshbooks.com/jumblethink. That's www.gofreshbooks.com/jumblethink. Thanks again, and make sure you get out there, do something one step to move your big idea and dream forward.
Les mères de famille, les enfants, peuvent également prendre un moment revitalisant dans quelques mois, lorsque vous aurez bien saisi la technique et que vous serez maître de votre corps. Vous pourrez vous décontracter même en travaillant.